Hello, my lovelies. Welcome to the Black Sheep Society podcast. My name is Jenna. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about gifted and talented programs, or is it a CIA PSYOP? So, what exactly is gifted or talented programs? Some of those can be as early back as elementary school. So, some of you may have been taken aside way back when and told that you were going to be put in a special program because you were special, you were gifted, you were talented, and that somehow, some way, they figured out that you had these certain talents, gifts, or abilities. So let's go over exactly what that entails. So let's discuss exactly what it means to be gifted and talented. Here's some characteristics that describe gifted or talented individuals. Giftedness is defined as having exceptional aptitude or competence in one or more area. Gifted people might also show remarkable abilities in such areas as language, reasoning, and the arts. So, those could be some areas that are highlighted if you happen to be gifted or talented. So, some sort of characteristics that they highlighted is exceptional abilities for demonstrating outstanding levels of reasoning and learning. So, a really high IQ, the statistics are typically 130 or above. So, genius type level learners, people who are high achievers, people who are super goal oriented, people who thrive in things like learning languages, math, reasoning, sciences, art. All of those could definitely be different categories that apply to where maybe your gifts, talents, and abilities are excelling above your peers. So there could be some creativity. Most gifted people might find that they have unique problem solving skills. So they tend to be people who look for loopholes, rule breakers, rebels, people that think outside of the box, or that they sense some sort of way to come up with new solutions to old problems, or that they come up with creative ways of problem solving. So big brain ideas is what comes to mind. So there could be some sort of task commitment. Gifted people might also show persistent motivation to compete and complete tasks. I do feel like for some of them, they're super goal oriented or very motivated by completing something that they set out to do. So they could be seen as overachievers, somebody who maybe reaches a lot of milestones very early in life. There used to be an old show on TV many years ago called Doogie Howser MD. And the premise was that he was a young teenage boy who was super intelligent and he was a prodigy. So he excelled in math and sciences. And I want to say, like, by the time he was 14, he had graduated med school or something crazy. So, sounds a little far fetched. However, it does fit into this category of people who are excelling in certain areas, very gifted, very talented. So things like that definitely come to mind. So, high expectations that these gifted people might hold themselves or others to really high standards, especially themselves. So, there's a lot of tendency to be a perfectionist. There's this need to accomplish a lot of things, and that they almost put themselves or others on a pedestal of how much they're actually able to achieve. And the goals that they set for themselves can be quite high, or for others, they might hold others to really high sets of standards as well. There could also be some divergent interests. So, gifted people can have vivid imaginations and really niche interests, meaning that it's a real specific type thing. So, let's say, for an example, maybe this person is super gifted at writing music. Let's say in their mind they see all of the notes on the sheet music and they can literally write the song in their head, that they know what it's supposed to sound like, all the different pieces that fit in there. That is not going to be something that everybody is able to do. That's going to be a really niche category. Let's say you're really gifted at speaking multiple languages and learning a new language is like second nature, like breathing to you. That's not something everybody is capable of doing. Maybe you're a master painter and you could paint like Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. There's certain things that some of these people possess that are super specific to them and them alone. Other times it might fit into a real specific category, but again, most people don't possess those gifts, talents, or abilities. These people can also have a lot of intensities. So, some of these gifted people might be more aware of, stimulated by, and affected by their surroundings. Loud noises might jar them or really overwhelm them. I feel like certain people on the autism spectrum specifically have some of these gifts and abilities, and the movie Rain Man comes to mind as well. So while he might have been extremely talented in some areas, he had difficulty communicating. He had difficulty being around certain places. And I remember there's one part in the movie where he's talking about they only go to this one part on a certain day at a certain time. It was his routine, and deviating away from that created a lot of stress or internal conflict for this person. So there could be a lot of obstacles that these gifted and talented people face in life, in their everyday life, yet they excel in so many other areas that it's strange that, it's like there's got to be an offset or a trade off somewhere because not everything can always be perfect and 100% all of the time. So, giftedness and learning. Gifted people may benefit from learning by self discovery and exploration. So, maybe they're more independent. Maybe they're somebody who really would rather do hands on learning. Maybe book knowledge is not their thing. Maybe they learn things by physically doing it or hands on sort of learning. Maybe it's more auditory, but there's all sorts of different ways that you can pick up your talents and abilities. They could also be acquiring skills through intuitive reasoning. So when I channel information, it comes through my intuition. And so sometimes it's that sudden knowing or that aha moment of, I don't know how I know that's the answer, but I know that that's the answer. So they might rely more on their intuitive instincts in order to process information. They also might require modifications to their educational experience to learn and realize their potential. I feel like as we progress in the future, we might start seeing in the classroom more experiences geared towards how specifically someone learns the best. Are they a hands on learner? Are they somebody who processes information by having to physically touch it or demonstrate what they have learned through physical means? Are they somebody who learns better through auditory means, meaning that they can listen and that they can learn things better? Are they somebody who learns better by seeing it demonstrated? There's so many different ways that people can process information, and I feel like as we go forward that we're starting to maybe change the structure of the classroom to help each individual student thrive in the way that they learn information the best. And I feel like that could be something that we start to see within the next probably decade or so, change in the classrooms. So, there could also be some causes for giftedness. The development of gifts and talents can't be attributed to a single factor, such as genetics or environment. It's usually multiple things. Some of it is genetics. You might just have really great genes. Maybe you have a lot of really brainiacs in the family, things like that. Maybe it's just something that a lot of people in your family happen to have. Or it could be due to a number of factors, some of which are environments. So let's say that you grow up in a family where they're very academic and maybe they're avid readers, maybe you learn language extra early, maybe there's some things that as a small child, you pick up on very quickly, and so it grows from there. I feel like for other instances, maybe it's more nature focused, and maybe that's how you learned what you know. But however it comes about, they all seem to have certain traits and things in common. So let's go over some common traits that gifted and talented people can possess. One is intellectual curiosity, just being curious about learning, creative thinking. This person or these people can learn rapidly. They definitely challenge authority. So, again, rebels, rule breakers, finding loopholes, things like that. Advanced vocabulary. They might be somebody who maybe as a very small child knows very big words and can use them in context. Again, is it their environment or is it something that's in their genes? It could be a matter of both. All right. The ability to focus on a subject intensely for an extended period of time. I would say that specifically, I've seen this in autistic people, is that they are so hyper focused on something. Maybe they forget to eat. Maybe they forget to do other things that are kind of necessities, and they're hyper focused on something else. It could be any number of things that captures their attention. I feel like people with ADHD or ADD can also be hyper focused on things and forget common things that you would think are, why would you forget to do that? Because the brain's going a million miles an hour in a totally different direction. And typically we see it actually be multitasking all of the time, and that actually helps them to focus. So it's kind of interesting. There could be difficulty making transitions. Let's say you're engaged in something that engrosses you and it has your full attention, and then it's hard to, like, oh gosh, I have to find a stopping point to try something else. So it can be difficult to transition. This person or these people can engage easily with adults. So I feel like even if it's a small child, like a toddler's age, preschoolers, that they seem to be way more mature for their age mentally. So physically, they might not look like that at all, but I feel like mentally they're able to engage with adults intellectually, adult conversations, and that it's almost second nature because their brain is definitely processing at a higher level. There could definitely be some issues with perfectionism. So that could also lead to things like OCD in the future, really kind of stemming from the fact that we have this everything has to be perfect. In reality, most things are very imperfect, that there's usually a lot of flaws. I typically don't edit all of my mistakes out of the videos as well because I'm human. And this whole series, this whole podcast is all about sharing knowledge. And part of that is being human and being flawed. So, a lot of these gifted and talented people have a struggle sometimes with perfectionism. So, that can definitely be a challenge to overcome as well. A complex sense of humor. I feel like dark sense of humor comes to mind, kind of a what do they call that? Macabre or very morbid, twisted sense of humor. And I feel like the reason that sometimes that happens is because they're kind of a few steps ahead of their peers. And so while they might already get the punchline, sometimes the people around them are kind of left like, I don't get it. What happened? I missed the punchline. And that's because they're just on a different level. They kind of get things that other people around them, definitely it goes over their head. There could be a need to explore subjects in surprising depth. So maybe there's a person that um, is across the world, and let's say they're German and they want to learn Japanese, and maybe they're just completely enamored with anime or learning the language, the cuisine, the culture. So I feel like a person could really just kind of get themselves lost in a topic for days, hours, weeks, and months on end, just completely like picking it apart, peeling back the layers of all the different things that they're curious about. So, a thirst for knowledge is definitely one of the traits that I feel like gifted and talented people possess. There could also be some extreme intensity, good or bad. They might be people who struggle with mood disorders. They could be people who have emotional outbursts. Maybe they all of a sudden break down in tears because they're overwhelmed and don't know how to communicate effectively. It could also be that maybe they're aggressive or prone to violent outbursts because, again, even though they're extremely smart in certain areas, they lack skills in other areas as well. Gifted people can also be sensitives, or they can be empaths, they can be mediums, they can be psychics. They're sensitive to energy or vibrational changes around them. They tend to read people very well. They tend to be almost like a human lie detector, and they know the answer typically before they ever ask a question. So it can be quite challenging for them to be around large groups of people. Social interactions can sometimes be a difficulty as well, but definitely dealing with some emotional sensitivity. High energy levels. So I feel like some of these people are just go-getters. Maybe they're marathon runners, maybe they're people who do a lot of outdoor activities, or type A personalities where they're very adventurous, and sometimes they throw caution to the wind and they just do what they feel they need to do, like skydiving out of nowhere. Well, I'm just going to go jump out of an airplane today. So they could definitely have this thirst for not only knowledge, but a sense of adventure and achievements. You could also be seeing people who are nonconformists, or they don't fit into societal norms. So again, they're rebels, they're rule breakers. They don't feel like the rules necessarily work for them. Not that they don't apply, they realize that there's rules, but they don't agree with them, or they try and kind of break the mold and go their own direction and do their own thing, that they don't appreciate having to conform to society norms. A vivid imagination, the ability to think about problems in an out of the box way. So, really, a lot of creative thinking, innovation, big brain ideas. So I feel like if you resonate with any of this, you could definitely have some of these traits. There are lots of little quizzes that you can find online to test some of these things, as well as you can take IQ tests to see where you fall in that category. So there are 6 profiles of gifted students. Type 1, the successful gifted student. 2, the challenging divergent gifted student. 3, the underground gifted student. 4, the dropout gifted student. 5, the double labeled gifted student. And 6, the autonomous gifted student. So, what are some common traits about these gifted and talented individuals? Some common traits that we found were intensely curious about many things. I feel like these people have so many interests. It's not put into like a single category of, oh, they're fantastic at chess, and that's the only thing they're talented at. I feel like most of these people will pick up new new little projects, new things they're curious about all the time. I feel like these people get bored extremely easy, and so they're always kind of navigating new things that excite them or pique their curiosity. So let's say somebody picks up an instrument and maybe they learn how to play violin in 6 months and they're fantastic at it. Well, they've mastered that. Now they're bored. Let's move on to a new one. Maybe they all of a sudden start writing classical music from scratch. There's art that comes to mind. Definitely things that are mechanical, things that they create, things that they build. And I feel like their mind is just always going. And so that creates this thirst for knowledge. But it also means that we probably drop things quite quickly as well, right? So just as quickly as you pick it up that you're curious about it, you could also decide that it's boring now and you have to let go and move on to something new. So they could also learn easily, comprehend new material in shorter time than peers their age. So again, things like advanced vocabulary, higher level learning in grade school. I feel like especially math and science could be areas that people thoroughly excel in if they're gifted and talented. Maybe you're several grades ahead of your peers in math. That was not my forte in school. I was horrible at math, but in certain areas, I feel like kids really do excel, and some of them blow their peers out of the water with how intellectual they actually are and able to master things. There could be processes with speed and understanding. So sometimes we start to see that these kids they're able to comprehend things at a higher level than those around them, and sometimes even their teachers. And so that's when I feel like we would really start to notice, okay, something's a little different about Johnny over there. He is kind of blowing the class out of the water. Tests are off the chart. And on the flip side of that, sometimes their test scores are garbage. We've also seen a lot of gifted and talented children that they test terribly, but are extremely gifted and talented. And so you ask a few of them, well, if you understand the information, how come it doesn't reflect in your test scores? And most of them would say, it's beneath me. I don't need to take a test. Like, the tests are stupid. It's boring. I want to move on to something that I feel is more exciting. They just don't feel it's worth their time. So a lot of times they'll just scribble in bubbles in a pattern. They're kind of doodling in the little test score area. So they just don't feel like it's important to test their knowledge because they're far superior. And most of the time they start to figure that out at a pretty early age. So there can be some sustained attention span. Again, where is the area of focus? What is it exactly that excites them? What is it that they're curious about? What actually holds their attention? Most of the time, it won't hold it for long. Again, they're going to have multiple interests throughout their lifetime, and they're always going to be busy trying to do something else, multiple things at once, learning new objectives, new projects, new things that excite them. So it might be difficult to hold their attention span for very long. They could be very independent, or they might prefer to work alone. So a lot of like lone wolf syndrome, where they really prefer to work independently. They could go at their own pace. They can, go ahead of the rest of the class if they should need to. But I feel like most of them excel by doing things independently as opposed to being in group settings. And there can be an advanced sense of humor. Again, a lot of their intellect might actually go over most people's heads. And so it can be difficult for them to find or make friends for the simple fact that the peers around them are not up to the same intellect as they are. Not saying there's anything wrong with the people they're around, but mentally they're several steps ahead. So it can be quite a challenge for them to, engage in social settings. So, where did the gifted and talented program actually come from? So, it was started in 1961 by the California legislature. It established the mentally gifted and minor program for students scoring in the 98th percentile or above on standardized intellectual ability tests. By 1980, 454 school districts and 160,000 students were participating in the program. I was one of those children. I remember in early elementary school being pulled aside after some random testing that we had to take and being put in specific class where we practiced things that the other students didn't get to do. So it's been a few years, but I do remember some of those things were focused on memory. Some of those things were focused on language. Some were math and science skills. Some were English. And we had certain exercises that we would do that would highlight some of the things that we scored the highest on. For me, I excelled in the sciences. And for a girl, that was something that was kind of unique. I was fascinated by how things worked. While I'm not mechanically inclined, I could create something if I could look at it. So I could draw things based on looking at a photograph. I could recreate something if I saw a picture of it sometimes. Mechanically, if I had a diagram, I could usually figure out how the pieces went together in order to assemble it. Music was another area that I excelled in, that it was something that I could remember pieces of music after only hearing it 1 to 3 times. I could almost memorize the entire piece of music. There were lots of different categories that we were tested in. Some of the things that we did, we were looking at photographs of things, and I can't remember exactly what the exercise was, but something about that we were trying to see kind of what kind of picture in our mind did it create. like the ink blobs that sometimes they would use way back when for psychiatry. And so I can remember looking at some of these images, and they would ask you, what do you see in this image? And you just tell them, what you saw. They'd make a note of that. You'd go on to the next one. There were certain puzzles that we worked through to see how quickly we could problem solve. And did we come up with creative solutions in order to actually get to the end of it, right? To achieve the goal of solving the puzzle. But did we do it with a completely different take on how to get to the end goal? So there were a lot of different things that they tested us on. I remember I was in that program most of the way through elementary school, and then for just a short while in middle school. And then I decided I no longer wished to participate through high school. So I did it for several years as a small child growing up. So, what is the minimum IQ for being gifted? So, they say that it's 130 on an IQ test. To be classified as gifted, most education departments require children to have an IQ score at 130 or above on a standardized test administered by a psychologist. However, a child can be classified as being mildly gifted with an IQ score of 115 to 129. So again, there's lots of tests out there that you can take even online to see where do you fall in gifted and talented, or do you make the cut? So I came across an article that I thought was interesting. So was the gifted and talented program a military psyop based on things like MK Ultra? If you've never heard of that, I challenge you to go do some research on your own. So this is a New York Post article that I found. It's called Weird But True. It says, I was enrolled in gifted classes as a child. I now believe it was a CIA training program. So, were you mommy's little spy? Adults who were enrolled in the Gifted and Talented Education Program, or GATE, decades ago as children, are now questioning if they were unknowingly being covertly trained by the CIA. So, the GATE program, which stands for Gifted and Talented Education, is primarily funded by individual state and local education departments within the United States, with federal funding coming from Jacob K. Javits Gifted and Talented Students Education Act, administered by the U.S. Department of Education. Essentially, the majority of funding comes from state and local sources, while the federal government, provides additional support through the Javits Act. So there's state level variations. So each state has its own policies regarding funding for gifted programs, with some states providing more significant support than others. The Javits Act is a federal legislation that provides grants to support research, demonstration projects, and teacher training related to gifted education. And most funding for the Gates project does come from local school districts' budgets. So back to our conspiracy theory of MK Ultra. So if you've never heard of MK Ultra, the premise is that it was a government psyop or psychological operation that was started to do things like mind control, to see if people could be manipulated to do certain things. Could they be manipulated to act against impulse, basically? So there were a few different categories of things that happened in this MK Ultra. So MK Ultra was a human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. Doesn't sound real great, right? So the term MK Ultra is a CIA cryptonym. MK is an arbitrary prefix standing for the Office of Technical Service, and Ultra is an arbitrary word out of a dictionary used to name this project. The program has been widely condemned as a violation of individual rights and an example of the CIA's abuse of power, with critics highlighting its disregard for consent and its corrosive impact on democratic principles. Project MK Ultra began in 1953 and was halted in 1973, so it ran for around 20 some odd years. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain functions, such as the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD. Other chemicals without the subject's consent were also administered. Additionally, other methods beyond chemical compounds were used, including electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. Project MK Ultra was predecessed or preceded by Project Artichoke. It was an organization through the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence and coordinated with the United States Army's Biological Warfare Laboratories. The program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of U.S. and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. MK Ultra's scope was broad, with activities carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions, aside from the military, including colleges and universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated using front organizations, although some top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. Project MK Ultra was revealed to the public in 1975 by the Church Committee, named after Senator Frank Church of the United States Congress, and Gerald Ford's United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States. The Rockefeller Commission investigated efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helms. All MK Ultra files will be destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations relied on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the small number of documents that survived Helms's order to destroy them. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MK Ultra, which led to Senate hearings. Some surviving information about MK Ultra was declassified in 2001. So, what in the world would cause people to think that this was a good idea? So, here's some background information. During the early 1940s, Nazi scientists working in the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Dachau during World War II conducted interrogation experiments on human subjects. Substances such as barbiturates, morphine derivatives, and hallucinogens such as mescaline were employed in experiments conducted on Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, Jewish, and other nationalities that were prisoners of war. The aim of these experiments was to develop a truth serum, which would, in the words of one laboratory assistant, Kurt Plotner, eliminate the will of the person examined. So we know that they did come up with a truth serum. That's something that it's not science fiction. It's a very real thing. It exists. Sometimes truth serum will be given to prisoners, especially POWs, prisoners of war, to get them to confess, to get them to spill information, especially if it's during times of war or hostile environments that they need to extract information and the person is refusing to cooperate. So truth serum is something that actually exists, and it was also something that they were trying to develop during this MK Ultra scenario. So, American interest in drug related interrogation experiments began back in 1943 when the Office of Strategic Services began developing a truth drug that would produce inhibition, there we go, uninhibited, I can't say the word, laugh at me, it's fine, some sort of uninhibited truthfulness that an interrogated person could basically spill their guts, right? To talk about these things that they normally would know, oh, I can't say those things, right? So if you think of the scenario of a POW that, they've been captured, they're behind enemy lines, they're being tortured, the other people want the information. And most of the soldiers would have been trained, don't give up secrets under any circumstances. But under duress or under some sort of chemical assistance, they may be forced to tell the truth of what it is that they actually know. And that was the premise behind studying some of these things and developing a truth serum. So there were many accounts that came to light during the Senate hearings about all of these different instances that some of these things were implemented. Most of them were done on unwilling or unknowing subjects. Some were our military personnel that were tested on. Some were other subjects, people in colleges and universities, others that were lower social or economic statuses that were tested on, things at all different social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign people. So several of these tests involve the issue of using LSD to unaware subjects in social situations. So in 1938, LSD was created by Albert Hofmann. He was based out of Basel, Switzerland. The early directors of MK Ultra became aware of the existence of LSD and sought to use it for mind control. In the early 1950s, MK Ultra director Sidney Gottlieb arranged for the CIA to buy the entire supply of LSD for $240,000, which in 2024 would be roughly $4,227 and change. The LSD supply gave Gottlieb the ability to fulfill his experiment by spreading LSD to prisons, hospitals, institutions, clinics, and foundations in order to see how citizens would react to the drug without knowing exactly what was happening to them. So the premise was that the early efforts of the CIA focused on LSD 25. It later dominated many of MK Ultra's programs. The CIA wanted to know if they could make Soviet spies defect against their will and whether the Soviets could do the same to the CIA's own operatives. So besides drugs, there was also hypnosis that was used. They experimented early in the 1950s, and the goals included creating hypnotically induced anxieties, hypnotically increasing ability to learn and recall complex written matter, studying hypnosis, and polygraph examinations or lie detector tests. So, hypnotically increasing ability to observe and recall complex arrangements of physical objects and studying things with relationship of personably and susceptibility to hypnosis. They also conducted experiments with drug-induced hypnosis and with anterograde and retrograde amnesia while under the influence of such drugs. So in 1973, amid a government wide panic caused by the Watergate scandal, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MK Ultra files destroyed. So some of the 20,000 documents survived the purge, but they had been incorrectly stored in a financial records building and were discovered following a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, in 1977. These documents were fully investigated during the Senate hearings of 1977. So you might ask yourself, what in the world does that have to do with gifted and talented people? So they were studied, they were test subjects, and a lot of times their parents had no idea that these children were involved in these programs. They would be pulled aside, singled out, and usually brought to a independent room somewhere and studied. So we learned things like remote viewing. These were things that the CIA was very curious about. They wanted to know who the brainiacs were, basically, and a lot of us were studied and followed. So whether we still are or not is a totally other story. But I do feel like for some of us, we have felt more like we were watched, like we were studied. Kind of the whole scenario of Big Brother watching sort of deal. So, especially now that we have so much tech in our lives, smart TVs, smartphones, cameras everywhere, right? Like something's always listening. I feel like they have had their eye on us since we were very young. And I feel like some of us are still being watched because of the gifts that we actually possess. So, whether it was done against our will, whether it was done under duress, things like that is going to be different for all different people. But I do feel like there were some of us that could have potentially been in MK Ultra subjects. So, gifted and talented children have exceptional abilities or potential to develop ahead of their peers. They might be gifted in one or more areas, such as academics, the arts, or physical coordination. Academic giftedness, learn basic skills more quickly and with less practice. So they might just really catch on to something ultra quick and a lot quicker than people their age or that people around them. They might be able to construct and handle abstractions more easily, to pick up and interpret nonverbal cues. Again, that also falls into the sensitivity topic of people that are human lie detectors or they read energy. There's somebody who might be an empath or they're sensitive to subtle things that other people wouldn't pick up on. These talented individuals know instantaneously. It's almost like, oh, so and so is having an off day, and they may not have said a word. They might look totally normal on the outside, but these people would be able to see that and to know. There could also be creative or performing arts giftedness. So they might have practical skills in music, design, creative, or performing arts. Maybe they're an artist, maybe they're a dancer, maybe they're a composer, but there's something to do with arts and creativity. They also could have exceptional production or creative thinking. So, again, being able to critical think on your feet, thinking outside the box, new innovative solutions to maybe old problems or new ways of doing things that are outside of the norm. There could also be other giftedness like above average physical coordination and memory. They call that muscle memory. So maybe you're very hands on and you just what comes to mind is playing the piano, right? So you have to put your fingers in certain positions to be able to know where the keys are, to be able to play effectively, because you can't always be looking down at your fingers while you're playing. That would kind of defeat the purpose. So I feel like some of these people, hand-eye coordination is a big thing, and that's something, an area that maybe they really thrive in as well. So they could also have more social and emotional maturity than other children their age, more emotional intelligence, more that they're able to kind of think more like an adult versus a child, that maybe they are a child, but they think more like an adult. They have more emotional intelligence or maturity. So, how are one of these children or people identified? So, there are individual intelligence and achievement tests that are often used to assess giftedness, using an out of level test designed for older students. It's an easy way to get a more accurate measure of students' achievement than a standardized state level achievement test. So, let's say you have a child that excels in math. Let's say they're in second grade, but they can do college level geometry, or maybe they are able to solve like physics problems, things like that. That it's like, how in the world would they even know how to do that? That would be something that I would say you would probably pick up on pretty quick. I also feel like language could be another one that maybe they excel in. Maybe, again, they speak multiple languages very early on in life. It could be that they excel in any number of areas, but it's going to be something that there's no way they should be able to be that good at the age level or the education level that they currently possess, things like that. So there's a couple of different types that are identified with being gifted and talented children. So this comes from George Betts and Maureen Neilhart. So they identified 6 different types: successful, challenging, underground, dropouts, double labeled, and autonomous. The gifted children can have a variety of characteristics, including advanced thinking, being able to understand material that's above their grade level, and emotional depth, being sensitive and emotionally intense at a very young age. There could also be a lot of curiosity or having a strong sense of curiosity. There could be a broad range of interests, being enthusiastic about unique topics. Humor, having a quirky or mature sense of humor, dark or macabre, could also fall into that. eccentricities, having odd habits that may be due to their way of thinking or sensory sensitivities, and self awareness, having a heightened sense of self awareness. Giftedness is less than 5% of the general population. So within that group, there are classifications of giftedness, including mild, moderate, high, exceptional, and profound. Gifted children can excel in multiple domains such as intellectual, academic, creative, leadership, and visual or performing arts. So, do you know somebody that could be considered gifted or talented? Or are you maybe one of the gifted and talented 5% of the population? There's plenty of little tests online that you can take. What were your experiences growing up in school? Were you one of those test subjects that maybe was called into another room and studied or quizzed about different things? Were you labeled gifted and talented growing up in school? I'd love to hear your story. If you guys have topics of discussion that you would like to see discussed on the podcast, please shoot me an email. It'll be in the description box of all the videos. And if you would like to be a guest on the Black Sheep Society podcast and you have a topic you'd like to discuss, please email me and we can discuss. Have a great week.